Hi everyone, I'm Julia and I'm here to talk about opening up conversations about mental health in computer science education. How does this work? Oh. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior studying computer science at the University of Waterloo. I help out with the Women in Computer Science committee at my school. We lead mentorship programs and really cool workshops for the women in computing in the community. And I'm also a writer. I write a lot about tech culture, mental illness, burnout, feminism. And I'm part of this really amazing group called Prompt. They're a community of speakers in tech who talk about mental illness. And mental illness is something really near and dear to my heart. I personally go through OCD, depression, and anxiety. And because of that, it's really inspired me to lead an open source project called IfMe. It's a community for an online community for people to talk about their mental health experiences with people they trust. And we're always looking for contributors, so that is my IfMe plug. So moving on, just to give you an outline of the talk, I'll be talking about three things mostly. Acceptance, coming to terms with my mental illness in university, how that's shaped my identity, and how I've reached out support for mental illness. So why should you care? Mental health is just simply part of being human. We live in a society where people do acknowledge mental health as a problem. We have hashtags, plenty of social justice campaigns talking about mental health, but it's something that people don't talk about openly still. And ultimately, it shapes the way we navigate through society. And why am I here today? Study and work environments in tech do not support and accommodate for mental illness enough. The lack of mental health support contributes to the pipeline problem. So a lot of university and students in general deal with mental health issues, and STEM and computer science are pretty difficult programs, and when they can't handle mental health problems on top of school, they end up leaving the pipeline. So in order to talk about this, I need to expand a bit more about myself. So I grew up in a really stressful immigrant household. My parents were Vietnamese refugees. I grew up with an autistic brother, and I struggled with counseling and therapy all my life throughout high school, and this led to problems with self-harm, suicide attempts, and medication abuse. And I thought going to university would solve all of those problems just because I was removed from the environment that caused me a lot of stress. But it turns out it doesn't. University is really stressful, and I go to the University of Waterloo, which has the world's biggest co-op education program, which is really awesome because you're able to do internships as part of your degree and get all of this wonderful experience. But with all of that greatness comes a lot of issues. Issues with succeeding and issues with being able to be your true self around your classmates. And it's an environment where people are constantly maintaining their personas and bragging and just competing with each other. And there's really no room to show weakness. And as a student at the University of Waterloo, I'm really privileged to have a co-op program and to be a Silicon Valley feeder school. And ultimately, the pressure to succeed is really the pressure to be perfect. And I study computer science right now, but I love taking courses on sociology and anthropology and just studying the way people think and how people create culture. And I've noticed that it creates three problems, the first being the culture of self-assertion, the second being issues with tokenism, and the third being issues with myths of exceptionality. So the culture of self-assertion is pretty straightforward. It's basically grooming your persona and constantly showing your successes and hiding your failures. And myths of exceptionality is kind of the culture, the mythical narratives that surround being in tech. You have to fit a certain mold. You have to have really strong technical opinions. For instance, having an opinion towards Vim and Emacs, and having obscure technical interests. And because of that, that leads to a really narrow definition of success. And as a woman of color and a woman that faces disability and mental illness, there are issues with tokenism. A lot of women here probably know that they're usually pigeonholed into more design roles compared to back-end roles. There's issues with being a stereotype. I cut my hair for the first time at the beginning of university, and I felt like I was pressured to do that because I wanted to be one of the boys. And when I did cut my hair, I was one of the boys, and I wasn't taken as seriously. And then as women in tech, there's pressures to be the model minority. Just because we're the most represented group, there's pressures to be that group to uplift other marginalized groups. And in order to be able to realize these issues, we need to have something called a sociological imagination. And it's basically the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and show empathy and being able to recognize things like privilege, the fallacy of the meritocracy that is tech, and issues of oppression and discrimination. And ultimately, when you don't do that, that leads to a mental health problem. Health simply isn't considered a factor of success for students. Students are busy studying for exams, trying to pay their way through school. It's not on the top of their bucket list. And because of that, like I said before, there's no room to be vulnerable and show weakness. And as a result, we deal with failure in really unhealthy ways. And for me, I actually failed my first year of computer science, even though I did have a prior programming background and I was self-taught. Formal computer science education is pretty difficult. It goes into things like math, logic, things that you don't really see in high school. And I wasn't prepared for that, and I ended up failing, and I didn't talk about it with anyone. I actually lied. Like, I told people I was doing really well, I was acing, and people saw me as this really awesome, badass woman in tech who was killing it. But really, I was weak, and I dealt with a lot of mental illness issues that were unresolved. And because of that, it took me a really long time to reach out for help. And when I did, I realized how broken the mental health system is. There are definitely things like counseling, therapy, academic accommodations, that being getting more time on an exam, writing in a smaller room, things like that. They're really great and really helpful, but they're very limited, and it just shows how much funding or how little funding universities get. In fact, I'm from Toronto, and the province that it's in, Ontario, gets $0 from the government when it comes to mental health services at universities, which is horrible. And like I said before, the services are horrible. They're long waiting lists, lengthy paperwork, and because we live in a society where mental illness is still a stigma, being able to go out to the doctor's office and ask for a diagnosis is a huge deal, and it's something that students can't really afford to do given their time constraints and their money constraints. And in general, like I said before, what is the incentive of showing weakness? You don't want your mental illness to define you. There are cultural taboos as well. And as a person of Asian descent who's Vietnamese, I know that a lot of people in the immigrant community, people of color, they don't talk about mental health as openly as, say, white people in the Western world. It's something that's not talked about openly, and there's a lot of stigmas attached to it. And like the tech industry, there is a diversity problem in the mental health community. Most people in the mental health community are white. And when you don't see someone that looks like you represented, it's really difficult to reach out for help. And because of that, it's important to have more open discussions about things. And I really like what the women in tech community has done here, created really awesome support groups and meetups for women to support each other and help each other. And I think the same thing should be applied in mental health as well. And by doing that, you're able to meet new people, you're able to get help, you're able to find the resources, and you're able to see people that look like you. And in order to get to that point, you really have to hold the system accountable. And unfortunately, with mental illness and with any type of illness, you have to advocate for yourself, which is something that's really difficult to do, especially with something as sensitive as mental illness. And that's something that I had to do. The previous term, I dealt with a lot of issues with trying to get mental health services. I was only getting therapy for OCD bi-weekly for 15 minutes. So I gathered students who had faced similar problems, and we had open discussions with faculty staff about it. And obviously, we didn't change things overnight, but being able to have those discussions, have something like the Tech Inclusion Conference, for instance, where you can talk about things publicly and state solutions, is the only way changes can be made. And before I end off this talk, I'd like to leave everyone with a bunch of really important points. The first being, there just needs to be better mental health education on campus. So when I was going through a lot of issues with my school, with the mental health services, I discovered that academic faculty, staff, professors, they do not get mental health training, which is pretty ridiculous because university is kind of the time in your life where people start to acknowledge their mental health problems. So having that education would allow for better services. And another issue that I face also was, in terms of trying to get accommodations, is that a lot of people see mental health accommodations as a crutch, and it trivializes academic integrity or innovation. And compared to like physical illnesses, mental illness is invisible, so it's really hard to advocate for, and it's really hard to prove that you're facing something. And in general, professors have a responsibility. not only to teach their students and impart knowledge, but to be mentors. They've obviously gone through the process of university. They've gone through stress, failure, and burnout. And I think they should be having more open discussions with their students about it, and just talking about the culture of tech and how things will be like once they leave school. And as a result, when you don't talk about something in general, it perpetuates ignorance. And most importantly, this point is something that I often have to remind myself. Students need to realize that they are worth more than their degree. Even though degrees are worth thousands of dollars and it's just a nice shiny paper, believe it or not, it's worth more than a human life. And it's really okay to own up to failure and seek help. So this being a tech inclusion conference filled with lots of people in the industry, a good question to raise is, what can be done in the industry to support students? So like the youth panel talked about earlier, it's really important to hire interns. And not only from top tech schools, not only at the MITs, the Stanfords, or even the University of Waterloos. There are computer science programs all over the world, all over the country, and they don't get enough attention. And following that point, don't just look for people who look the part. Don't look for people who have those obscure technical interests or who can brag about watching Star Trek or that Silicon Valley TV show. Tech comes in all shapes and sizes, and you're not doing anyone a favor when you're just looking for one type of person. And something that's really near and dear to my heart and something that I face a lot with is openly promote and provide mental health services, not only for interns and new grads, just for everyone in general. And I personally experienced being an intern for 4 years. It's really hard to find mental health services out there, especially as an intern. So it would be great if those services existed. And in general, prioritizing mental health services over typical perks. You log on to like a career site for Twitter or some kind of company, Microsoft, and people are bragging about, oh, we have foosball tables, beer kegs, ping pong tables, gym access, but no one brags about their mental health services. No one says, oh, we have really awesome meditation services or yoga services or an on-staff psychiatrist or someone you can talk to. So I would really love to see that in our industry. And the last point I'd like to leave is be a mentor and most importantly, a friend to other people. If you think back to the image I showed earlier with the people feeling like they were really isolated, the reason why they feel that way is because people aren't reaching out to each other. Reach out to your neighbor. If you see something's wrong, talk to them and create that environment where you can have open discussions. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Sorry, hello. I want to say you're a true inspiration. Thank you for talking about this, because I've seen a lot of teenagers going through this, and it's great to see, this topic being discussed. Do you have any tips for teenagers that are having the mental health challenges and, in making it through college and, trying to prepare themselves for the future?
Definitely reach out to peers, friends, teachers, allies, and unfortunately, a lot of teenagers don't have that privilege to have people who are supportive. And it's really hard to say in that situation what to do. In general, the mental health system needs to be a lot better. There needs to be services for young people. And that was something I had difficulties with in high school, just finding someone to talk to I could trust and getting support. But as adults in this room, you guys can do things to help out and reach out to people. Any other questions? Last question.
Thank you. Do you think that maybe using the label mental health kind of actually impedes addressing some of these issues? Like, if somebody has, we label something anxiety disorders as a kind of mental health issue, it makes it hard for those people to get help because, on the spectrum of things, we all kind of have our own deficiencies in certain areas, not even calling them deficiencies, but we have differences, right? Somebody may have more anxiety than me in certain situations, and rather than addressing them as mental health issues where you need to go to like the health center, maybe just having support groups, right? And not be too quick to label things as disorders. Would that kind of improve how we address these issues and these differences? It's just kind of like a thought I've had, because I feel like we're too quick to label things as disorders.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question to answer. For me, I alternate between mental health issues and mental illness, and it's something I still struggle with, but I think it's important to take it seriously and not take it as something that take something lightly. But I think there is a value in having support groups and having open discussions about it. That way, people can tell their stories and talk about what they're going through rather than just saying, oh, I have bipolar, and that's it. Because everyone has their unique stories, and I think diagnosis and having a title for it only tells so much. Anyways, thank you so much.